Here's something almost nobody thinks about. Every person alive today had ancient ancestors, ancestors who survived childhood, all of them, which sounds obvious until you remember what childhood was like 50,000 years ago. No hospitals, no baby formula, no safety net, nothing. And still, here you are. Which means that somewhere in that harsh line of survival, someone kept the children alive, even the ones whose parents did not survive. So, what really happened to those kids? Let's set the scene honestly. A small group, maybe 25 people, maybe 30, moving all the time, following food, avoiding predators, dealing with cold and hunger, all at once. A mother dies while giving birth. A father is taken by something in the dark. The child is still there. Now what? The answer, most people assume, and almost nobody says out loud, is that the child probably did not survive. That ancient life was too harsh, too limited, too focused on staying alive right now to carry a child that was not yours. That idea is wrong. Not a little wrong, completely wrong. And the evidence that proves it wrong is not a feel-good story. It is hard data from researchers who spent years in the field living with the closest thing to ancient humans that still exists. And before we get to orphans in particular, we need to understand something basic, something that changes the whole picture. In 1992, researcher Edward Tronick and his colleagues published a study in the journal Developmental Psychology. They had spent time studying the F of the Congo, one of the most isolated hunter-gatherer groups on Earth. What they found was amazing. IFI infants were handed to non-biological caregivers within the first days of life, not weeks, days. By the time an IFI infant was a few months old, they were spending more than 50% of their time being held by someone other than their biological mother. Non-biological adults, unrelated women, and older children. All of them holding, feeding, and caring for an infant that was not theirs. This was not unusual behavior. This was the system. This was how it worked from the very beginning. Which means the question is not what happened when a parent died. The question is whether the child even noticed the difference. In 2008, researchers Alyssa Crittenden and Frank Marlowe published a major study. Crittenden was at the University of California, and Marlowe was at Florida State University. They spent 17 months studying the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer group in Tanzania. Their way of life matches ancient human life more closely than almost any group on Earth today. The researchers were trying to answer something simple. Who really raises the children? What they found changed everything. In Hadza camps, the biological mother provided less than half of a child's total care. Less than half. The rest came from grandmothers, aunts, older sisters, unrelated women in the camp, and even unrelated men. The child did not belong only to the mother. The child belonged to the group, and that was not unique to the Hadza. Then, in 2023, researchers at the University of Cambridge published a major review that studied hunter-gatherer childcare across many societies. Their finding was specific, measurable, and striking. In hunter-gatherer groups, non-biological caregivers provide between 40 and 50% of a child's total care. 40 to 50%. Before any parent dies, before any tragedy happens, the group is already raising the child together from birth. Which means when a parent did die, and parents died often in the ancient world, the child's care situation changed much less than you would expect. The network was already there. The relationships were already formed. The child was already known by every adult in the group. An orphan in the ancient world was not a stranger needing charity. An orphan was a child the whole group had already been raising, but here is where it gets more interesting and a little more ruthless. Because ancient humans were not keeping orphaned children alive only out of kindness, they were keeping them alive because it made sense. Think about what a child meant in a small ancient group of 25 to 30 people. A future hunter, a future gatherer, a future mother, a future protector. One more productive adult 15 years from now was not a small thing. It was the difference between a group that stayed together and one that slowly fell apart. Crittenden's research found something remarkable about Hadza children. They begin finding food on their own around age 5. By adolescence, some can meet 50 to 70% of their own daily calorie needs. 50 to 70%. An orphaned child older than 5 was not a burden. They were already partly feeding themselves. And ancient humans understood this naturally, not with spreadsheets, not with economists, but with something more powerful. Survival instinct shaped over millions of years. The groups that abandoned their orphans died out. The groups that kept them alive are the reason you exist. And then there is something else worth thinking about, something the data does not fully show. What happened to the orphan's sense of belonging? In the modern world, an orphan knows they are an orphan. There is a word for it, a legal status, a file somewhere. In an ancient group of 30 people, there was no such category. There was no moment when someone sat the child down and said, "Your parents are gone. You're different now." The child had always been held by many adults, always been fed by many hands, always been watched by many sets of eyes. Losing a parent was devastating. Grief was real. Grief was ancient. But the child's place in the group did not change. Their identity did not change. They were still a member of the only world they had ever known. In some ways, an ancient orphan experienced a kind of continuity that modern institutional care struggles to copy. Not because ancient life was easier, but because the group never stopped being their home. Now, here is the part that should make you uncomfortable. The 2023 Cambridge researchers made a direct comparison between hunter-gatherer childcare and modern Western childcare. 2 systems, 1 winner. Their conclusion was not flattering to modern life. In hunter-gatherer societies, the alloparenting system structurally protects children from family hardship. When a parent dies, the network absorbs the loss automatically. No application required, no waiting list, no means testing. The child simply keeps being raised. Now compare that to the modern world, where orphan children move through bureaucratic systems, where outcomes for children in state care are measurably worse across almost every indicator. Educational achievement, mental health, life expectancy. We replaced a system that worked with a system that is still trying to figure itself out. And we called it progress. But let's stop on that for a second, because this is not just ancient history. This is personal. Think about the last time someone who was not your parent showed up for you. A teacher, a relative, a neighbor, an older friend, someone who had no biological reason to care and still did. That feeling you felt, that is not modern. That is 50,000 years old. It is the same instinct that kept orphaned children alive before language existed, before civilization existed, before anyone had a word for what they were doing. They just did it. Sarah Blaffer Hrdy, an anthropologist at the University of California, Davis, in her 2009 book, Mothers and Others, published by Harvard University Press, makes an argument that is still debated, still unsettling. Humans are the only primate that regularly allows non-biological caregivers to raise their offspring from birth. Chimpanzees do not do this. Gorillas do not do this. Our closest relatives protect their offspring from non-biological handlers with something close to paranoia. But we hand our children to grandmothers, aunts and neighbors within days of birth. Hrdy argues this was not a cultural development, not a civilizational choice. It was a biological adaptation. The human infant evolved to be raised by many caregivers. The human adult evolved to care for children who are not biologically theirs. We were not built for the nuclear family. We were built for the village. And the orphaned child, the child without parents in a group of 30 ancient humans, was not a rare case the system struggled to handle. The orphaned child was exactly the situation the system was designed for. So what did ancient humans do with orphans? The same thing they did with every child. They passed them around. They fed them. They taught them to gather food, to hunt, to read the sky and the seasons. They raised them. Not because they were saints, not because prehistoric life was a utopia, but because in a world with no room for mistakes, every child who survived to adulthood was worth more than the cost of keeping them alive. The orphan was not a problem. The orphan was the future. And 50,000 years of human survival says one thing clearly. You do not raise a child alone. You never did. And somewhere deep in your biology, you already knew that because you are here. Which means someone, somewhere back in that long, dark chain of survival, looked at a child that was not theirs and stayed.